Before we begin, I want to acknowledge and Friendship Village Day from Friendship. It shows their commitment to the community, and we think that's really very important. He's unable to be here in person today, but I'm happy to introduce to you Mark Young, who is the Director of Marketing and Sales at Friendship Village, and on behalf of that group, he wants to extend a warm welcome. So Mark, take it.
Hello, my name is Mark Young, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales here at Friendship Village of Tempe. For those of you who may not know, Friendship Village has been in expansion mode since July 2019. In July of 2021, we opened our Mesquite building, which has 40 new apartment homes. Phase 2 of our expansion efforts, Acacia, will offer 64 apartment homes, underground parking, and an impressive rooftop restaurant. We are scheduled to have Acacia open in the summer of 2024. If you'd like a tour of the campus, please contact the marketing department or go to our website, friendshipvillageaz.com, to see a virtual tour. Friendship Village is very proud to be a featured sponsor of the Tempe History Society and appreciate the different perspectives offered by the many speakers. Thank you all for your time and enjoy your talk.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks again to Friendship Village for their ongoing and continued support of these lunch talks at the museum on behalf of the Tempe History Society. I think this is one of the programs that people have been waiting for all year long, and we're very excited to have Kathy Nakagawa. I knew I would get that wrong. Kathy Smith is here to Nakagawa, is that right? Yes, thank you. It's just because I'm nervous up here. I've never done this before. Here today, does everybody remember, and I think this is kind of the audience that probably would, the flower gardens that were on Baseline? I think one of the tragic things of all of the growth that we've had here in the valley is the loss of most of those, because it was a real pleasure just to drive down Baseline Road and get the aroma of all the flowers growing there. It's a very special period in our history. Kathy is a native Arizonan and of Japanese American descent. Her family moved here just before World War II, and in the beginning they were renting some land to farm in South Phoenix. But like many Japanese Americans at the time, in one of the darkest periods of our history, her family was placed in internment camps during the war. And after the war, they had to start their lives all over again, but her family did buy land on Baseline Road and continued farming flowers and other plants. Kathy will tell you about her experiences in growing up there, but in reading a bit of her background, she reminds me somewhat of my daughter. We had our child. We paid an extra $25,000 to have our child genetically predisposed to take over the family business. And that just didn't seem to work out. I think we know each other well enough that I can tell you, rather than go into the family business, my daughter decided to become a teacher. Now, I have nothing against education and teachers, but not for those that were born and bred to take over the family empire. Because the idea was that my wife and I could retire, and then she would send us a check now and then. But she didn't want to be a part of that. And as I understand, Kathy grew up in the business as we were child abusers. We used our daughter for anything we could in the business. She could even count change at the cash register when she was 8 years old. So, you go somewhere today and you give them $1, 2 cents, and they don't know how to make the change without using a computer. So Kathy, I think, did grow up in the business, spent a lot of time, but decided maybe there were some other career paths she could take, but never really was far away from the family business. So rather than give her whole talk, I am going to introduce to you Kathy Nakagawa, and this is a presentation I'm really looking forward to. Welcome, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me get this out of the way.
I am getting over a cold, but I did test negative for COVID, so don't worry about it. But that is so funny about the change. My mom had a particular way of making us count back change, and I'm sure I could do it when I was 8 years old too. She made us count back specifically to $1, to what the next dollar was, and then the dollar bills on top of that. And so I still do that today. And my kids always give me a hard time because, like, you don't punch in how much cash the people give you. You just count it back to them. And I'm like, yeah, because my mom made me do it all in my head, right? It was good practice. Thank you so much for everyone turning out today. This is such I guess I so appreciate everybody remembering the history of the Japanese American flower farms down on Baseline Road. And I don't know as much as I wish I knew because, like many kids, I grew up around it and took it for granted. And then once it was gone, I was like, oh my gosh, I should have learned more while everyone was there and alive. So I know you probably have stories too and you have questions, and I'll do my best to answer those. But I'll go through a little bit of the history to help us. Let's see. Oh, it's not quite working. Okay, there. So this is a photograph that shows what Baseline Road from 48th Street to 32nd Street used to look like in spring. And the bloom time for the stock were usually from February through March. They started actually growing and experimenting with flowers in the late 1930s before many of the families were incarcerated. But then after they got out after the war, they really expanded upon that. And so in its height, there were over 300 acres of flowers growing along Baseline Road. And some of you probably do remember the stalk. They were so fragrant. It was the cinnamony smell. And like I tell people, we'll ship them in now, usually from California. But the top smells so wonderful, and the bottom smells like radishes. If you ever smelled the bottom of the flowers, they smell really strongly of radishes, and they have a root system that looks like that too. But they would pull them out by the roots, and they would hydrate them well, and then the families would cut them and box them up and ship them all over the world. So they did a lot of that. Okay. Oops, I went too far. Okay, did I go too fast? Let me see. Okay, I'll stop. I'll do this. This is what Baseline looked like in the very early 1960s. And the building, I have my little pointer here. So if I can do that. That building there is where our flower shop still is. So that was the original building we had, and that was the flower farms that my dad's family grew. And they also had greenhouses so they could grow chrysanthemums and try some carnations and roses too. And then you'll also see trees there. There were a lot of citrus groves. So as you remember, many of you remember, right, South Phoenix was really an agricultural mecca. It had so much going on there. And the start of it was from 48th Street. And the Japanese American families that grew there first grew vegetables, but then they started growing flowers. Okay. Yeah, so this is just some of the flowers growing in the fields again when they were first starting to come up. The first family that grew were the Kishiyama family. And they grew, the dad of the Kishiyama family, his name was Kajiro, and he first experimented with flowers and figured out that South Mountain provided this microclimate for that area, so it would allow flowers to do really well there. And so his farm was right on the corner of 40th Street and Baseline Road. So some of you remember that it was a really iconic green look for the flower shop. And they were the first family to grow flowers and also the last family to grow flowers. So they stopped growing in the 1990s, and they were the last ones to grow. George Kishiyama took over the business for his dad and ran it for many, many years. And so I think he was really sad to have to give it up. But it became, like for everyone, it became very hard to continue growing because of the competition from South America and also the increased expenses in seed and fertilizer and water. Okay, next. So that's George Kishiyama and his daughters, Michelle and Cindy. And is Cindy here? Cindy said she was going to try to come. No, okay. I was hoping Cindy could come because she could answer some questions too. But that's them in the fields. Okay, next, please. The Nakagawa family, that's my family, were the second ones to grow. And my dad was really, his dad had taught him how to farm. But my dad was the one who had to put together all of the land, and right after World War II, his dad's health wasn't great, so my dad likes to tell stories about how he had to take out loans on his life insurance, and he was able to put all the business together and grow then. So in the late 1960s, he decided that what would be great for tourism or tourist attraction was to build this tower. So this pagoda tower was built, and you could walk, climb to the top of it and look around and take pictures there. And so when we were kids, there would be people out the front door waiting to go up to the top of the tower. Dad also closed in the flower shop, so he was the first one to have air conditioning along there. And so even though the facade has the wood on it, behind it was just the old shed that was originally there on, let me see, on this part. That was just the old shed. And then he built this part new, which in the 1960s had a new concrete floor, and it was all closed in with brick, and had the air conditioning on that side. And so the part of the building that still stands today, if you come to see us, is that side. The tower and the old side of the building was burned in a fire in 1994. And so although they rebuilt, they couldn't rebuild the tower. But you'll have to come down and see, because we have tried to preserve the sense of what the business is like. Next, please. So that's my dad in the fields with the greenhouses behind him. And I only recently learned that the first time they put up the greenhouses, they put them up incorrectly. They put them up in the wrong direction, and they had to tear them down and then put them up again. So they were always learning. And my dad would say that. He would actually, in some newspaper article I found about him, he would apologize. He's like, we're not trained how to do flower design. We're self-taught in doing these things. And he was self-taught as a farmer. And the first time he had to farm as a young man, he didn't even know how to tie the plow onto the horse. He had to have friends help him with that. But he figured it all out, right? And he liked to read a lot and do research. And so many of the farmers along Baseline Road, they actually were approached by agricultural researchers to try out different strains of flowers and vegetables to see how they would do in that climate. Okay, next, please. The next family that grew was the Nakamuras, and this is Stowe Nakamura. And if any of you knew Stowe, he always had a cigar in his mouth. And he always wore a hat like that, too. He was just the nicest guy. So the Nakamura family started growing or farming in Phoenix right after the war. And they also started off vegetable farming, and then they started growing flowers. And they ran their retail and wholesale business like the other families, but they stopped growing probably also in the 1980s. The Nakamura farms were run by Stowe and his brother Hajime, and his mom, Hannah. And so there was, these were all really family businesses. Everyone was working in different ways. And it's funny, when you talked about your daughter having to do everything in the business, I still call on my kids to help with the business now. I need somebody to deliver, so they will come and help. Okay, next, please. This is another picture of the Nakamura family, and that's when they were sorting vegetables. So we all the families ran not just flowers, but they did vegetables, and they grew. I remember the summer squash and the cucumbers and the tomatoes and the onions. So they had a big vegetable farming business too. Next, please. The Cicados were another family that grew along Baseline Road. There were 7 together, and they were actually related to our family. Ken Cicado's wife was my dad's oldest sister. So they started growing in 1951, and they kept running the business for a long time. They had a fire at the farm, and that hindered their growth. But they kept operating just the flower shop itself for many years until 2004, although they were no longer growing. And so that's my Uncle Ken and my cousin Sandy in that picture. At some point in time, every single kid, usually of the families that grew along Baseline Road, were featured in a newspaper picture at some point. Okay. All right, next, please. So a lot of people remember also Sat's Rancho. This is what the typical flower stand looked like. It was metal siding and metal roof, and then it had the garage doors that open and the wooden stands in the front. So the Iwakoshi family also started growing in 1951, and then they closed their business in 1981. But they loved the flower shop, and I know a lot of people still, usually people will call us up at Baseline. They're like, did you used to be on the other side of the road? I'm like, no, you're thinking about the Kishiyamas. They're like, okay, are you the Nakamuras? No, we're not. Are you the Watanabes? No, we're not the Watanabes. So they'll go through every family. We're the Nakagawas, okay. Next, please. And that's another picture of a member of the Iwakoshi family. And some of the stalks that they used to grow, so fragrant. All right, next, please. And then the Watanabes were another family that were there. And they also, a lot of the kids went to school, so I know a lot of people will stop in at the flower shop and say they went to school with one of the Watanabes. But they were a little bit further down Baseline Road. And they, I think, grew both in Levine and on Baseline Road. So one of the families, the Mariamas, grew across the street from us on Baseline, but they actually didn't have a stand there. They sold over on Indian School Road. But the Watanabes grew right there on Baseline and also grew further on Levine. Okay, next, please. And this is just some pictures of, I think these are so nice. During the spring was the main time when the newspapers would come out to show to take photographs of what the fields looked like and to highlight some of the families. And so the picture on the left, is that right? is of the Kishiyamas and the older Kishiyama, not George. And then the other one is just some kids giving flowers to their grandmother. Okay, next, please. So throughout the time when the gardens were really highlighted, everybody remembers the smell and the look of the flower fields. But I think we don't necessarily think about how much work it took to farm the flowers, and then the cooperation between individuals from many different ethnic backgrounds in order to get the fields planted and picked. And I will meet people sometimes who lived in Guadalupe, and they said their families grew there. We know there are Filipino families that grew and helped pick the fields a lot. And so the flower gardens, I know, are highlighted with the Japanese American families, but we really want to remember the fact that so many other communities ensured that we could continue to grow there for so long. Next, please. I think one of the things I was always most impressed about when I remember my dad working the fields was how much they did to box up and ship all over the world. So there are letters apparently that were sent to the Kishiyamas from the Eisenhowers and the Rockefellers about how much they love their flowers. Arizona, or the flower farmers in Phoenix, had a little bit of a jump on the California farmers because we were a little bit warmer, so they could get their crops planted and then picked earlier than California so they could get their stock over there. So the stock was really the big crop that they shipped to other places. And it kind of astounds me now. I mean, I'm running the flower business now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I can't even imagine what they had to do in order to quickly pick all the flowers, cut them, wrap them, box them up, drive them to Sky Harbor, get them on a plane, and so that they would get shipped there. And all the families worked together to do that. It wasn't like they were in competition with each other. They really helped each other out. So as one family learned something new, like when the Kishiyamas said, hey, flowers grow pretty well here, then my dad's family learned that the flowers grew pretty well, and other families started growing. It was really a cooperative venture among all of them. And I love that they all worked together. And I would see the older gentlemen, Mr. Nakamura and Mr. Kishiyama and my dad, and they would go out to lunch like every other week or so and just sit and talk at the old Smitty's lunch counter. I just thought that was great that, they still, after all those years, kept working together on things. Next, please. This is just one picture of, they of course had to keep the flowers as cool as possible, so every family had a huge cooler, a big walk-in cooler. And this is Mrs. Kishiyama, who was in the walk-in cooler then. And this says Detroit bound, the flowers that she was packing up then. Next, please. I think Phoenix did highlight the fact that South Phoenix was such an agricultural area, but the way they did it was through the flower fields. So this is an ad from the Arizona Ways and Days. I believe that was the old magazine. That was the Sunday magazine that was part of the Arizona Republic. And they said, visit the beautiful Japanese flower gardens. And they highlighted how nice it was. And we found one ad that said, come to the best side of Phoenix, the south side. And it was because of the flower fields there that they said that. Next, please. All of the kids that grew up in there, like us, learned how to not necessarily plant, so I never learned how to farm, but we definitely learned how to help with the business. So as a kid, I would, help wrap flowers. I would help to pack the vegetable boxes. I learned how to make corsages at a very young age and to make small bouquets and arrangements. I tell a story about how I asked to plan the wedding for my Smokey the Bear and Mrs. Beasley doll because I really wanted to do a little event on my own, and so my mom helped me do that, and I did all the flowers myself. I was so proud. But I think, like any, I think this is a typical story of immigrant families who have a small family business where all the kids have to help at some point. But the thing is, most of us did not go into the business eventually, and that's why the families finally had to sell. It wasn't necessarily a super lucrative business, as they could no longer grow and as there was so much competition in other places. And so where the strength of the business then became, or the value of it, I guess, was in the land. And so that's why most of the families sold their land. And my dad's side of the family also sold their land, but decided that they would carve out he would carve out where the flower shop was. And so he kept that a little bit over an acre where the flower shop is, so we could continue running just the flower shop even if he couldn't farm. Next, please. We've been featured in things like, this is an Arizona Highways article from many years ago, and it shows a little bit in the background the trellises that were used. We get so many calls from people asking for sweet peas, because a lot of people remember the nice smells of the sweet peas. And we don't have them, and I try shipping them in, but they're not as good as the ones we used to grow. So one of these years, I'm hoping that I'll be able to grow sweet peas again. But growing here are some of the, I think those are calendula, and then the stalk in the background, and then the covered areas are probably where the sweet peas and chrysanthemums were growing. Next, please. Yeah, this is just more. And it was interesting to me how many people would come out and walk in the fields and just look. So there was never, I mean, I have had people tell me, we used to steal some flowers at night. But I think for the most part, right, people were really good. They didn't take the flowers. They just walked among the fields. They took pictures there. And that was all. Okay, next, please. These are my cousins. They are in their 60s and 70s now. This tells you how long ago this photo was. But this is a postcard. And if you go on eBay, I think you can still find this postcard some places. But it's my cousin Linda and Dee Dee, and holding bundles of stock. So it's kind of, it's a postcard that crops up every once in a while. Next, please. So this is when the tower was going up in the 1969, I believe. And I think about this when I look back at the photos. That's me and my sister Naomi in the foreground. But I think about this because my dad had to take a big chance. He was really a good entrepreneur, right? He learned how to farm. He learned how to build a flower business and become a florist. But he also decided, you know, he wanted to build the tourist piece of the business too. And he did it by putting this tower up. And so I think back about the risks he took, right? He had to take out big loans to put up this tower. And he was supporting our family, and he was also supporting his mom, who was still alive at the time, and making sure all of the fields got planted. So I did not appreciate it enough at the time, but when I look at this picture now, I think, wow, I would have been like, had panic attacks thinking, will this pay off, right? And it did pay off. It was a great place for people to come and remember, and we loved playing in it when we were kids. Okay, next, please. Well, this is Naomi and me in the flower fields. And I'll say this is probably about this time. When we were kids, when every holiday we would have to help. So the business was a lot different than it was. They would make up a bunch of arrangements because people would call and say, I want a Christmas arrangement at the $30. And so we'd make up a bunch of arrangements for $30 and a bunch at $50. And then we'd just go through and tag everything. It's not like now where you go online and you can pick the exact picture you'd like of your flowers. It was very different. But it would be so busy then. We would be there till really late at night helping during Valentine's Day and Mother's Day and usually the Christmas holiday. But about a little bit past when this was probably when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, I started thinking, I don't want to work at this business very much. And my dad is quoted as saying, I have a daughter who said she never wants to marry a farmer or a florist because they work too many long hours. And I'm sure that was me saying that. And Naomi says, that was you. I know it was you. It wasn't me. But, wasn't that the business was fun growing up in as a kid? We would run around in the fields, and our grandma's house was right across the way, and so we'd run over to see her. We'd jump over the irrigation ditches, and our dad built a little bridge over it because he was worried we'd fall into the irrigation ditch, so he built a bridge over it. But I think it was that I wanted to do more things like my own friends were doing, and being this part of this business was very different than the worlds that they lived in. And so I gradually did much less with the business as I got older. Next, please. This is my brother, Mark, and this is one of the flowering kale, which is another thing that they grew that was amazing. Look how big that is. Yeah, we get some flowering kale now that we bring in, but they're only about like this big, and now it's huge. And my dad also used to keep all the seeds from when he let some things go to seeds so he could have the seeds for the next season, but he also sold them. So we would have customers come every year who would get their seeds for certain things there. Next, please. And these are the Kishama kids, also, again, featured in the newspaper. Next photo, please. So I guess in the 1960s, 1970s, there started to be more and more stories about how the gardens were having a hard time and they were not going to do as well. And part of it was the competition from South America, where people could grow like beautiful roses and carnations and other flowers and ship them in for less than what we could grow them here. So that was part of the challenge. And I think part of it was also the farmers were getting older and none of the kids were going into the business. And so as they started shutting their doors and selling their land, people would still come by and they'd be like, where are the I still have people coming by today, like, where are the flower fields? And I'm always so apologetic. I have pictures up on the wall, but we don't have fields for people to see anymore. And as I mentioned, the Kishiyama family was the last ones to stop growing in the 1990s. And when they closed their doors, it was another newsworthy event because they were the first, and they were the last ones to continue growing. My dad passed away 2 years ago, in 2021. And up until then, my sister had helped with the business a little bit, but then she moved to Seattle with her husband, and actually she helped run the business for many years with my dad. And then my brother had helped off and on with the business sometimes. But he was really just kind of by himself there with our longtime employee, Maria Marquez, who did all the design work. And although the business wasn't doing great, he just said, what else am I going to do if I don't keep the doors open? And so all through the pandemic, they would continue to fill orders, and he worked until Thanksgiving, right before he passed away in January of 2021. So we were always really grateful for that. And I think one of the things my siblings and I talked about when my dad passed away was, what are we going to do with the business, right? It survived this fire. We thought that maybe my parents should have closed the business then in the 1990s after the fire, because they were already in their 70s then. And then we thought, later on when my mom passed away, maybe my dad should retire then. He kept saying, nope, I'm not going to retire. What am I going to do? I don't want to sit around. He watched his friends retire, and he thought it wasn't good for their health. So he said, I'm just going to keep going in. So he did. For a long time, he was the only one who would keep his the keys to the business in his pocket. He was the only one that would have the keys, so that he knew he had to show up every morning to open the doors because nobody else could do it. He eventually did give the keys to other people, but it took him a while. So when he passed away, we had to decide what to do. And even though I think this headline could be the one for any time that the flower business isn't always a rosy business. It's kind of hard. There's lots of competition from different areas. But we decided to keep the business going because of its history. Next slide, please. So my dad didn't think we would keep the business going. I think he said he used to think about it. He's like, I don't know what you're going to do with it when I'm gone. Maybe you'll turn it into something else. And we thought maybe we would. And somebody came to the door a week after he passed away and said, do you want to sell? Like, what are you talking about? No, it felt awful, right? Why would you be doing that? But we decided we were going to keep it going. And I'm the sibling that lives in Arizona now, and I am a professor at Arizona State University, but I happened to be on sabbatical when he passed away. So I took the last remaining months of my sabbatical to really relearn the business because I hadn't been part of it for a long time. And then the next year, I kind of juggled things between being a professor and running the flower shop. And at the end of that year, I thought, maybe I need to retire early and just run the flower shop. Maybe I should do that. And in lieu of that, I requested a leave of absence for a year. So I'm on the leave of absence this year. But just as I got approval for that leave of absence, our building was hit by 2 cars. So in April of 2021, almost exactly a year ago, 2 cars hit our building. It's crazy, right? So the building survived a fire. It survived these 2 cars hitting it. It took down half the building, but we could keep the retail side going. So I told my sister, I said, do you think this is a sign that Dad's saying I shouldn't retire early? He's saying that's not a good idea, just close the business down. She's like, no, he's not saying that. He's saying you can do whatever you want with the business. You can make it into anything you want. It's okay. You don't have to just stick with tradition. So we rebuilt, and we're rebuilt now. We just finished the rebuilding process 2 weeks ago. So if you come down now, you can see it. We have murals on the building that was hit, and we worked with wonderful artist Ariana Enriquez, and it looks really nice and bright and pretty, but Baseline is still a really busy street, right? So it went from, you saw that one picture was a 2-lane highway. It's now a 6-lane highway. They took our whole parking lot, our whole front parking lot, and had to help us. The city of Phoenix had to help us reconfigure the business to put the parking lot in the back. Next slide, please. So I think about that now, and this is a story when the Kishiyamas sold their business. Next slide, please. And I really am grateful that my dad decided to keep the business going, the flower shop part of the business going. Because, you know, although people ask us, where do you get your flowers from? And we ship them in from California. There's a few local farmers, flower farmers, that we'll try to occasionally get things from. But we also bring in from South America. I think really the beauty of our business now is in the history and the sense of community it brings to people and the ability to remember what Phoenix used to be like. And we have so few places like that. And so I love having the opportunity to come out in the community and reminisce a bit and talk about things. And I really appreciate you all being here and talking with me and listening to the stories that I have to tell. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take some questions. Is this okay? Everybody can hear? All right. The first thing that came to mind after telling my story is, why is it that children who don't want to go into the family business become teachers?
I do not know if I have an answer to that question.
And just, you know, had to be before social media that would have educated. But
what was your family business?
we had a bookstore and antique store in downtown Tempe for 35 years.
Oh my gosh, I know exactly which one it was.
Yes,
Yeah.
that after our daughter was enslaved in, decided that she didn't want to do that anymore. I'll get to you right in the back in a second. I don't think I heard it, but how did flower growing get started here in the valley? We were known for citrus and other crops, but cotton, alfalfa, but flowers was, a unique sideline of its own. How did that all get started?
Right. It really was the Kishiyama family that started. They experimented with it, and they figured out that flowers would grow well just there in South Mountain. I know they grew in other parts of Phoenix, but really they figured that the way that, with the irrigation system and also with the way that South Mountain kind of protected the area, that flowers could do well. So something like stock, I read, has to go into the fields by late September because it needs the cold to be able to grow and bloom by February and March. So they figured all that out. So the Kishiyamas was really the first family, and then they shared that information with the other families.
And when did the flower growing begin, after World War II, or was some of it in place before?
Yeah, some of it was in place before World War II, but all of the families started growing. I would say, let's see, our families, the Nakagawa family, started in the late 1940s, and then the other families came in like the beginning of the 1950s. So that's why you really saw this huge acreage of flowers in the 1950s and 1960s.
And you said your dad, when he came, was a farmer. What was he farming?
Oh, well, my dad, if he had his choice, I don't know that he would have chosen to be a farmer. His dad was born in Idaho, and then he lived in Utah for a while where his dad farmed, and then his dad's health wasn't good, and so he needed, they had relatives here in Arizona that told them to come here. So my dad started to farm vegetables because that's what his dad was farming. And then as he got older and after they got out of the camps, that's when they started also doing many more of the flowers too.
And then I've got one very serious question. You talked about having to protect flowers, which are rather fragile, in walk-in coolers. How popular were those coolers in the summer?
Oh, you're right, because all that they had were the EVAPs to cool the rest of the business, right? Although, it would cool off a lot more than it does today in the evenings.
All right, some other real questions.
Hello, Kathy. Nice to see
Hi,
you.
Christine. Thank you.
I want to tell you this story. I heard from a miner, because I am from mining town, the credit card was the curse of the working people. I was told by a family friend, actually a school friend, childhood school friend. We were talking about your talk, and she lives out of state, wished she could be here. And she said, Chris, Let me tell you my memory of the Japanese flower gardens. She said that she and her family would come from Globe to Phoenix to shop for clothes for the children for school for the fall. And of course, this was in the late 50s. So they had credit cards because now they could shop in Phoenix in the big cities instead of shopping at the company stores. So there was a credit card for learners. There was a credit card for Goldwaters. There was a credit card for Hartfields. There was a credit card for other stores opening up all up and down Washington. So the family would come, pack the car, children, grandmother, aunts, parents, to shop once a year for the fall. Before they left to go back to Globe, the last thing that they would do was drive back and forth, up and down Baseline with the windows open so that they could smell the flowers before they left for Globe to smell the sulfur smoke.
That's so nice. And I'm sure they had to pay cash for their flowers along Baseline Road.
Hello, I'd just like to know the name of your flower shop, please.
Oh, sure. It's Baseline Flowers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Willie Mae Crosby, and I think we're related because I lived on 32nd Street and Broadway, and every Sunday evening we would ride up and down Baseline to smell the flowers. So thank you for still being here with the flowers.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, Claudia.
I'm a Pacific Islander, and I came here in 1981. And my mother, she introduced me to the flower gardens because that was her belonging. She could go and visit for 1 hour to each of the flower farmers and speak in Japanese. And I was, when I moved from Honolulu, I was the assigned driver. Every Sunday, we started out at 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. And when we finish, our car will be full of vegetables and flowers and everything. And we would take it back, and all her neighbors would wait with their baskets and bags to receive their weekly flowers and vegetables. And until now, I still miss the garden because it's a place of belonging for my mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Oh, I know this.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Oh my gosh, Ellie, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming.
So good to have you. You spoke about the desire to keep the shop around, to preserve a little bit of history. And so beyond doing special events like this with partnerships with museums and stuff, what are some other things that you're doing to help to get the word out for all of the new visitors that are coming into Phoenix that may not know about the agriculture in the South Mountain region?
Oh, yes, I should be doing more. I'm lucky that I have a daughter who's social media savvy, and so she helped us get up on Instagram a little bit better. It's not that I'm not, it's that I just kind of resist doing it. So we are on social media now, and that's helped. The car crash, as awful it was interesting because it must have been a slow news week because we had every news station come out to cover that car crash. It was also 2 weeks before Mother's Day, and I think that made it a really interesting story. Like, flower shop stays open for Mother's Day, even though we had 2 cars crash into it. So we've done that. I think our mural has generated a lot of interest just as people drive along Baseline Road and they watch that go up. We've been working with local Buzz. If any of you are on social media, it's a new platform that highlights local places, local restaurants, local events, and so we've been doing that. And then we've been trying to be a host for different events. So we hosted the 25th anniversary for the Asian Pacific American Studies program at ASU a couple of weeks ago. We're going to be hosting an art event for Asian Pacific Community in Action in later in April, we've done a storytelling event, partnering with some people from South Mountain Community Storytelling Institute. So we'd love to do more things like that. So if anyone has like a book reading or something they'd like to do, we'd be happy to host those kinds of things.
And to your question about getting the word out, we've got a full house here. So now you all are appointed as ambassadors for the flower shop, and to let people know that it's still there. I hope that this isn't an indelicate question, but all of these flower gardens were owned and managed by Japanese. Do you think there's a cultural connection to that, that it occurred that way?
I think, well, it was because after World War II, there weren't too many places where they could get farmland. And so this was one area that did have agriculture there, but it wasn't developed agriculture. So they were able to get the land and lease it. But they had to do a lot of work. They had to put a lot of work into to get it to the point where it was farmable for flowers like this. And so the Kishiyamas and others talk a lot about how rocky it was and how they had to remove all those rocks. It was the fact that after World War II, there weren't very many places where Japanese Americans could have land, and so that's how they ended up where they were, there in South Phoenix.
But just the raising of flowers is unique.
That's an interesting one. I think it was because I do think they were very good at figuring out how to work with the land, and that was something that actually drew a lot of racism from other farmers early in the 1920s, when the Japanese farmers and other Asian American farmers could grow like good crops of cantaloupe, and the other farmers weren't doing as well. And so they got really angry about that. And I don't think it was it's not inherent to them. I think they just researched it and tried different things and shared that information a little bit more.
It's very interesting. Yes, hold on for just a second.
Have you considered publishing a book about this history?
Some people have suggested, yeah. I would really like to. You know, there's not, most of the original family members who ran the farms have passed away, but I feel like there's probably enough research around and articles, and there's a few people around still that we it would be nice to have a book of some kind. Oh, thank you.
Well, and it really is, I don't know other parallels, maybe over in California just because of the climate, but this was just a unique piece of local history and culture that deserves to be documented. Not only the flowers, but the history of the Japanese Americans. I was really touched. You said your parents came from Idaho?
My dad did. My mom grew up in California, but then her family was incarcerated in Arkansas.
Yeah, and that's what's troubling. I didn't hear when family came from Japan. Your family was already well established as American citizens, and that's something. And we had a presentation on that earlier. It's something we never want to forget, because it's really a black mark on American history, something that should never have taken place. But I think, at least in this local example, the recovery was marvelous, coming up with something very unique like flowers. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yep. Did you say you? I'll get right back to you. Hi there.
Yeah, I'm Elias Esquel. I'm interested in language mostly, and in Spanish we have, after the third generation, it's hard to keep the children, learning a foreign language. It shouldn't be foreign to them, but it is. But you don't have a country living right next to you Japan is a long ways away. So how good was the retention of the language?
It wasn't good at all, I'll say. Yeah, my parents both spoke Japanese, but my dad only spoke a really rough form of it. My mom spoke a more formal form of Japanese because she worked as an interpreter and translator after the war. But then they didn't raise us with anything more than just phrases. So my grandparents spoke Japanese. We only knew my grandmothers. My grandmothers spoke Japanese to us, but we didn't understand a lot of what they were saying. So it was really unfortunate, right? So I did study Japanese when I was in college, and I went and spent a year in Japan, and my Japanese got pretty good then. At that point, I could communicate with my grandma, and I was really grateful for that. But yeah, you lose it so fast between generations.
I lived on Baseline and between McClintock and Burrell on a ranch in 1940.
Wow.
We moved there, and the Japanese gardens were already growing flowers there, and the story was, and you just confirmed what we had been told, is that the land was not good enough for other farmers because it was too hard to farm. And so they sold it, or I don't know how they got it, but they sold it to the Japanese, and all the Japanese had to do was take the rocks out of them. And made it into good land. And we know about marginalized groups because Victory Acres, which is over here, is basically a neighborhood that grew up out of World War II, because the farm workers, we were farm workers, had no money to buy any land anywhere else, so George Tipsherany subdivided the 40 acres or 50 that he had there between Baseline and Apache, and sold it, and that place is 90% Hispanic, but they're all farm workers. They're not business, they came from all over, and a lot of them did come. There's lots of miners there, but most of them are farm workers.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had someone up front here. Yes.
I was curious as to who bought the land, and was it a fair price or lucrative?
Oh, for the families? Most of them, yes, it was a fair price because they saw the value of the land as going into commercial or residential. And so our land, my dad and his family decided to sell it to a developer. And they actually sold at a pretty good time because then it was still developing. It was an interesting process though, because the city is always difficult to work with, the city of Phoenix, and so the land had an agricultural purpose for a long time. It was being taxed at what its best rate could be, which was commercial, they kept saying. So it was really hard for my dad to continue to pay the taxes on the land because he wasn't farming it, and he did have some friends who farmed it. So as long as he farmed it, he could continue to pay more of an agricultural tax, but as soon as it wasn't being farmed, they were going to tax him at a commercial rate. And that's what happened to all the families, and that's why the families eventually had to sell. They just could not keep up with the property taxes on the land.
And that's one of the mechanisms that Phoenix used, and other cities do that, to get properties, which is really a shame. I think this was terrific. How about you? So you have your assignment, and that's the next time you come, there will be a book signing after her presentation. And I think for that, we will do it by reservation. And so what do you think? Maybe in the fall we could
Oh my gosh, that's a big thing. And I just noticed your tie. I appreciate that. Did you
Oh, I try. I'm known for tacky ties. And I really look for, well, they're tacky in other ways, but this is the only thing floral that I could
It's very
kind
nice.
of, thank you for noticing that. And actually, this is a tie that goes back probably to the 30s or 40s. It really is historic. And you probably see this little tail coming out. This was in an era when people wore vests, so the actual length of the tie is only like this, which I think would rather look stupid when I've got something bulging out in the middle. But anyway, thank you for noticing that. All right, so we have just as a memento of your visit here, we've tried to find something that Richard Nearing had done floral, but we couldn't. So Richard Nearing, I don't know if you know the name, was later in life, well, like probably all of his life, he was a great artist, but he later in life, after his professional career, he was able to spend time doing pen and ink drawings, despite the fact every time I saw him, I hit his hands with a hammer because I can't draw a straight line, and he did magnificent work. He passed away a few years ago, and we managed to get his whole collection. So this is a limited edition print, signed, and it's 120 of 250 of the Peterson House.
Oh,
so we'd
my
like to
gosh.
have for
Thank
you to
you
have
so
that.
much.
And
Thank you. I love that.
later on afterward, I'll draw some flowers in there, so it'll make it look really good, and put an ad
beautiful.
on there. And then,
Thank
of
you.
course, we now have, particularly for new members, very fine pens. These are really terrific, and they're over $100 a piece. But we're willing to give them out if you become a member, and that ought to encourage you. So there's a pen.
thank you.
And another remembrance of your visit here.
Thank you so much.
We thank you very much for coming out
Thank you
today.
very much. Thank you. Thank you.
You can leave the computer, we'll get that afterwards.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
leave it,
actually.
well, take, okay. To start earlier and end a little bit later, that gives a lot more variety. So on May 10th, the second Wednesday of the month, we will have, kind of following on this theme, Lynn Nemeth, who is the executive director of Boyce Thompson Arboretum. Has everybody been up there? If not, this is a place you should go to visit. It is not like the Botanical Gardens, which is good in its own, but the Arboretum is a very special place. And we've been trying for ages to see if we can get her to come, and she promised that she would be here next month. So that will conclude our season for 22-23, and I think by then we'll be able to make some announcements about the upcoming season. Also, once more, if this doesn't look like a car key, it looks like a door key that we found. Does that belong to you? If you will go to the counter out there, we'll take your fingerprints. We need your ID and a picture of your firstborn, and we might be able to get it to you. I'll get it right out there. A couple of things that are coming up at the museum. We've always got activities, and for the most part, they're all free, and that makes them even better. On May 5th, performances at the museum continue with the Bohemian Insurgents group, and Carmela Imas, a very well-known jazz performer, will be here on May 19th. And Saturday, May 6th, I don't even know what this is. High Rollers, the golden age of Arizona skateboarding, will be a special movie screening, a discussion panel, live music from a group called Fat Gray Cat, and live skateboarding. And so this is Saturday, May 6th at 6 p.m. And of course, you're invited to bring your skateboards and join everybody. And we will have 2 emergency ambulance vehicles here. Not that anything special would happen, but we just like to account for everything. And on May 18th, Thursday, the Tempe History Museum Community Chats program. We'll have a special discussion on Malcolm X as others knew him. This is part of a series by our partnership with the African American community of Tempe. So you can see that there's a lot going on. If you haven't been through the gallery, I really would suggest that you do that. We've, for a little longer, our exhibit of the Yaqui community will continue, and in the fall, we'll have some word about that next time. We've got some great exhibits at the museum coming up. So, with that, again, Kathy, thank you very much. She has a cold, but she came out here and spoke to us anyway. And we'll see you for our final lunch talk of the season on May 10th. Lynn Nemeth from the Boyce Thompson Arboretum. Have a great month.